I was lying on the plush sofa in my parents' living room, sipping tea that had gone slightly too warm to be truly comfortable but exactly warm enough to be soothing, when my phone started buzzing itself sideways across the coffee table. I looked at the screen. My husband's name, his contact photo still the one from our honeymoon, both of us laughing on a beach that felt like it belonged to a different couple entirely. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again almost immediately, the particular urgency of a second call arriving before the first has even finished processing. And I let that one go too, watching it buzz itself in a slow circle until it stopped. A minute later, the voicemail notification appeared. I didn't listen to it right away. I finished my tea first, actually, which I think says something about where my heart had settled by that point. Because there was a time, not very long ago at all, when I would have dropped everything, a hot drink, a conversation, my own comfort, the instant his name appeared on a screen. When I finally played it, his voice came through wrecked, cracking in places I'd genuinely never heard it crack before. Not even at our wedding, not even at his own father's funeral. "They fired me," he said, and I could hear him pacing, could hear traffic somewhere behind him, could hear the particular panic of a man standing in a parking lot with absolutely nowhere left to go. The CEO literally walked into my office and told me to pack my stuff. "Please, you have to talk to your dad. This has to be some kind of mistake, please, just call me back." I set the phone face down on the coffee table, closed my eyes, and let myself smile, slow and complete. The kind of smile you don't perform for anyone. The kind that only exists because there's genuinely nobody left to perform for. It wasn't a mistake. It was the exact price of a front row concert ticket. He just hadn't gotten the itemized receipt yet. To understand how a man's entire career could collapse in the span of one Monday morning phone call, I have to take you back 5 days, to the day everything about my marriage that I'd been quietly, carefully not looking at finally forced its way into the light. I married Marcus 5 years ago, back when his career was still climbing instead of cruising, back when the six-figure salary was a thing we celebrated together instead of a weapon he used against me. Somewhere in year 3, the money stopped being ours and started being his, and along with that shift came a whole vocabulary I got used to without ever quite agreeing to it. My job pays for our lifestyle. I need to distress. You have more time than I do. Small sentences, delivered casually, that slowly rearranged the furniture of our entire marriage until I was the one who handled the leaking faucet, the car in the shop, the flu that knocked me flat for 4 days while he worked from the guest room because he couldn't afford to catch anything before the Henderson pitch. I told myself it was the job. I told myself the pressure made him this way, that underneath the stress there was still the man who used to bring me soup and rub my feet during our first year together, back before 6 figures, back when we were just 2 people figuring things out. I built an entire internal defense for him out of nothing but hope, and the specific kind of denial you only develop after years of practice. The Thursday it happened started like any other evening. I'd gotten home from work with a dull ache low in my abdomen that I'd been ignoring since lunch, one of those pains you tell yourself is nothing. Probably something you ate, probably stress, probably anything other than what it actually was. By 7 o'clock, it had sharpened into something I couldn't rationalize away anymore, radiating down into my right side with a specificity that made my stomach drop for reasons that had nothing to do with the pain itself. "I think I need to go to urgent care," I told Marcus, who was standing in front of the bathroom mirror adjusting the collar of a concert t-shirt he'd bought specifically for tonight. Some band I couldn't even remember the name of, tickets he'd been talking about for 3 weeks straight. He glanced at his watch. Actually glanced at it, a small, involuntary movement that told me everything before he'd said a single word. "Right now, the doors open at 7:30. We've got the whole pregame thing with the guys." He turned back to the mirror. "Can you just take some Advil and see how it feels? You've had stomach stuff before." The pain doubled me over the kitchen counter about 11 minutes later, hard enough that I knocked a glass off the edge and heard it shatter somewhere near my feet without fully registering the sound, because every part of my attention had narrowed down to the white-hot line running through my right side like something was actively tearing. "Marcus," I said, and something in my voice must have finally cut through because he came around the corner fast, car keys already jangling in his hand, though I'd learn in about 40 minutes that the urgency wasn't entirely for me. The drive to the ER took 19 minutes, and Marcus spent roughly 14 of them complaining about traffic, checking the clock on the dashboard, muttering about how his friends were already at the venue, how he was going to miss the opening act, how this was. And I remember this phrase specifically because I've replayed it in my head more times than I can count. Seriously terrible timing. I was doubled over in the passenger seat, sweat prickling along my hairline, gripping the door handle hard enough that my knuckles had gone white. And my husband was doing math out loud about how much of a concert he was going to miss, because his wife's body had chosen an inconvenient night to fail. The ER took me back fast once they heard the pain description, which in hindsight should have told me something about how serious this actually was. Hospitals don't rush you unless rushing matters. A doctor pressed 2 fingers into my lower right abdomen, watched my face when I nearly came off the table, and said the word appendicitis with the calm efficiency of someone who'd said it 1,000 times before. "It's likely about to rupture," he said, already talking to a nurse over his shoulder, already setting things in motion. "We need to get her into surgery within the hour." I reached for Marcus's hand. "I want you to understand that I wasn't thinking about anything strategic in that moment, wasn't testing him, wasn't building a case. I was just scared, genuinely, primally scared, about to be put under anesthesia for emergency surgery, and I wanted the person I'd promised my life to hold my hand while they wheeled me back." He checked his phone instead. I watched him do it. I watched his thumb swipe up, watched his eyes flick to the screen instead of my face, watched him do a small, private calculation that had absolutely nothing to do with me. "Okay, so this is routine, right?" he said to the nurse more than to me, already backing half a step toward the door. "Appendix stuff, they do this all the time, it's basically outpatient at this point." "It's a same-day procedure, generally low risk," the nurse said carefully, in a tone I recognized, even through my own pain, as the tone of someone choosing her words to manage a situation she didn't fully understand yet. "See," Marcus said, and he actually smiled, actually reached down and patted my shoulder the way you'd pat a coworker's back after a decent presentation. "You're gonna be totally fine. I'll swing by after, okay? Text me when you're up." He was already checking the time again. "I gotta go, traffic's gonna be insane if I don't leave now." I don't fully remember what I said. I know I said something, some small, broken version of "please don't go, please just stay," that came out smaller than I meant it to, swallowed halfway by another wave of pain rolling through me. I know he didn't stop walking. I know the last thing I saw before they wheeled me toward pre-op was the automatic doors of the ER sliding shut behind him. And beyond them, through the glass, the shape of him jogging, actually jogging toward the parking lot, phone already up to his ear, probably telling his friends he was still coming. The pre-op room was cold in that specific hospital way, fluorescent and sterile and entirely indifferent to whatever you're feeling inside it. A nurse asked if there was someone in the waiting room for me, someone who'd want updates during the procedure, and I said no, just my phone, he'll check his phone, in a voice that even I could hear didn't quite believe itself. They started the IV. Someone explained the anesthesia in a calm, practiced voice I only half absorbed. I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the small perforated holes in the one directly above me, because it felt like the only thing left in the room I had any control over. I felt the tears slide sideways into my hairline before I fully registered I was crying. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, steady tears rolling into a hospital pillow while a mask lowered over my face and a voice told me to count backward from 10. And somewhere out there in the city, my husband was parking his car, adjusting his concert t-shirt, and walking toward a venue full of lights and noise, and absolutely no thought, none at all, of the woman he'd left alone on an operating table. 10, 9. I remember thinking, with whatever fragment of clarity the drugs hadn't taken yet, that I was completely, entirely alone. 8. And then nothing at all. I woke up to a dark room and a particular kind of quiet that hospitals only have in the very early hours of the morning, when even the machines seem to hum a little softer out of respect for whoever's sleeping. My mouth was dry in that specific post-anesthesia way, cotton and chemical at once, and it took me a long moment to remember where I was, why there was an IV taped to the back of my hand, why my abdomen felt like it belonged to someone else, someone stitched together in a hurry. The clock on the wall said 11:47 p.m. I'd gone under a little after 7. I turned my head slowly toward the chair beside the bed. It was empty. Not empty in the sense of someone having stepped out for coffee, chair still angled toward the bed, jacket draped over the back. Empty in the sense of never having been sat in at all. The chair sat exactly where housekeeping must have left it, squared neatly against the wall, untouched. A nurse came in a few minutes later to check my vitals, moving with the brisk, practiced kindness of someone who's done this exact walkthrough 1,000 times. And I watched her eyes go, almost involuntarily, to the empty chair, and then to me. And something in her expression softened in a way that told me she'd clocked the whole situation before I'd even said a word. "How are you feeling?" she asked, adjusting something on the monitor beside me. "Okay," I said, which wasn't quite true, but felt like the only answer available at 11:47 p.m. in a recovery room with an empty chair. She hesitated at the door for a second longer than she needed to. "Is there anyone we can call for you? Family, a friend, anyone who'd want to know you're out of surgery?" "I want to tell you that question didn't land the way it landed. I want to tell you I brushed it off, said something breezy about my husband being on his way. But the truth is, that question, gentle, professional, completely unremarkable to anyone who's ever asked it as part of their job, hit something in me that had been quietly cracking for hours. And I felt my eyes sting in a way that had nothing to do with the anesthesia. "I've got it," I said instead. "Thank you." She left. I lay there in the dark for a while, listening to the soft mechanical rhythm of my own monitor. And then I reached for my phone on the little rolling table beside the bed. Movements slow and careful, because reaching that far still pulled at the stitches in a way that made me suck in a breath. No missed calls, no texts, nothing. I opened Instagram because some masochistic, curious part of me needed to see it confirmed in real time rather than just imagine. And there it was, right at the top of the stories, his name, his little colored ring indicating a recent post. A shaky, neon-lit video of a stage from what looked like a genuinely excellent seat, close enough to see the sweat on the lead singer's face. Marcus's hand in the corner of the frame, holding up a plastic cup of beer, the caption typed in bouncy yellow letters, "Best night ever guitar clinking." Posted at 9:14 p.m., 2 hours and 14 minutes after they'd wheeled me into surgery. While I was under a mask on a table, unconscious, cut open by a surgeon I'd never met before that night, my husband was raising a plastic cup of beer to a caption calling it the best night ever. I looked at that story for a long time. Long enough that the app logged me out of the story view and dropped me back to my feed. Some algorithm-selected video autoplaying beneath my thumb that I didn't even register. Here's the strange thing, the thing I still find myself turning over even now. I thought I would cry. I'd spent the whole drive to the hospital, the whole pre-op process, that entire terrifying countdown from 10, bracing for exactly this kind of moment. The confirmation that he really wasn't coming, that I really was as unimportant to him as the evidence kept suggesting. I'd built up so much dread around it that I assumed when it finally arrived, it would break something in me completely. It didn't break anything. It just ended something, quietly, cleanly, the way a light switches off in a room you've already decided to leave. I set the phone face down on the blanket. I didn't cry. I lay there in the dark, my hand resting flat against the bandage taped over my stitches, and I felt something in my chest that I can only describe as relief. Strange as that sounds, the relief of finally being done pretending this was a marriage instead of an arrangement I'd been quietly subsidizing with my own dignity for 3 years. I picked the phone back up. I didn't call Marcus. I scrolled to a different contact entirely, one I hadn't needed to call in this particular capacity since I was maybe 22 years old, homesick during a rough semester abroad. My dad picked up on the second ring, voice thick with sleep. "Hey, sweetheart, everything okay? It's midnight." And I don't know exactly what it was, the exhaustion, the anesthesia still working its way out of my system, the sheer accumulated weight of the last 5 hours, but my voice cracked wide open the second I heard his, in a way it hadn't cracked once through the entire surgery, the empty chair, the Instagram story. "I had emergency surgery tonight," I said. "Appendicitis, I'm okay, I'm out of surgery, I'm okay. But Dad," and here it finally came, the thing I'd been holding so carefully still since 11:47 p.m. Marcus left, before they even took me back. He went to a concert. There was a silence on the other end of the line that I want to describe carefully, because it wasn't shock exactly, and it wasn't confusion. It was the particular silence of a man recalibrating something he'd suspected for a long time, and just received final confirmation of. "We're leaving right now," he said. His voice hadn't risen at all. If anything, it had gotten quieter, more level, the way certain men get quieter instead of louder when something has genuinely, seriously upset them. 20 minutes. Don't call him, don't text him, just rest. I heard my mother's voice in the background, already asking questions, already moving, the particular sound of a house waking up fast and with purpose. They made it in 18 minutes, which for a 40-minute drive at midnight tells you something about how fast my father was willing to go. I remember my mom coming through the door first, straight to the bed, both hands finding my face like she needed to physically confirm I was real and breathing before she let herself do anything else. My dad came in a beat behind her, and I watched his eyes do a slow sweep of the room, the monitor, the IV, my face, and then, unmistakably, the chair. The empty chair. He didn't ask where Marcus was in a way that suggested he expected a complicated answer. He asked it the way you ask a question you already know the shape of, just waiting for the last piece to confirm it. "Where is he?" "At the concert," I said. "He left before they took me back. He hasn't called." My dad didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam anything, didn't curse, didn't do any of the things you might expect from a father hearing that his daughter had been abandoned in a hospital bed hours before major surgery. He just went very, very still for a moment, jaw tightening slightly, and then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. "I need to make a call," he said to my mother more than to me, already turning toward the door. "I'll be right outside." I watched him walk into the hallway through the little window in the door, watched him lift the phone to his ear, watched his mouth start moving in a low, steady rhythm I couldn't hear at all through the glass. I didn't know yet exactly who he was calling. I didn't know, lying there in that recovery bed with my mother's hand wrapped around mine, that the quiet, level-voiced phone call happening 8 feet away from me in a hospital hallway was the exact moment my husband's career, though he wouldn't know it for another 60 hours, had already ended. My mom squeezed my hand and smoothed the hair back from my forehead the way she used to when I was small and sick, and certain the world was ending. "Sleep, baby," she said. "We're here now." And for the first time since the pain had first bloomed low in my side hours earlier, I finally let myself close my eyes and actually rest, because whatever was happening in that hallway, whatever quiet machinery my father had just set into motion with a single phone call at nearly 1 in the morning, I knew, with a certainty that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with 28 years of knowing exactly who my father was, that I didn't have to worry about any of it anymore. Marcus showed up at the hospital the next afternoon, a little after 1, smelling faintly of stale beer and whatever cologne he'd sprayed on top of it in a doomed attempt to cover the smell, holding a bouquet of flowers that still had the bodega price sticker curling off one corner of the cellophane. I heard him before I saw him, heard the particular cadence of his voice in the hallway, bright and performative, the voice he used when he wanted witnesses to a version of events that hadn't actually happened. Hey, I came as soon as I could, traffic was insane." My mother was on her feet before he'd finished the sentence. I want to describe this moment carefully because I've thought about it a lot since. The way my mother, who has spent 32 years being warm and soft-spoken and endlessly patient, positioned herself directly between the doorway and my bed without a single word of preamble, arms crossed, expression flat in a way I'd genuinely never seen on her before. "You need to leave," she said. "What? I'm just..." Marcus held up the flowers like they were some kind of legal defense. "I brought her flowers. I wanted to see how she's doing. Can I just..." "She had emergency surgery last night," my mother said, voice still even, still quiet, in a way that somehow made it more frightening than if she'd been shouting. "You left before they took her back. You didn't call. You didn't text. You posted a story from a concert while your wife was under anesthesia." She took a step closer to him, and to his credit, or perhaps just his cowardice, he took a step back. "You are not welcome in this room." "That's insane," I already explained. "The tickets were non-refundable." "Marcus?" My father's voice from the chair by the window hadn't risen at all, but the single word landed with enough weight that Marcus actually stopped talking mid-sentence. My dad didn't stand up, he didn't even fully turn his head. "You should go." Marcus looked at me then for the first time since he'd walked in, and I watched him search my face for some flicker of the woman who always, eventually, forgave him. I let him look. I didn't give him anything. "We'll talk when I'm home," I said, which wasn't a promise, wasn't an invitation, was really just the fastest way to get him out of a room I didn't want him standing in for one more second. He left the flowers on the little rolling table on his way out, bodega sticker and all. My mother threw them away before the door had even fully swung shut behind him. Monday morning, Marcus went to work. I know this only secondhand, pieced together later from things he said in increasingly desperate voicemails, and honestly from things I heard through my dad, who'd apparently gotten a fairly detailed account from the man who orchestrated it personally. But from what I understand, Marcus walked into that glass-walled office on Monday morning fully intending to complain to his coworkers about his dramatic wife and her attention-seeking hospital stay, completely unbothered, completely convinced that whatever weekend chaos had occurred was already safely behind him. He didn't even make it to his desk. His assistant told him the CEO wanted to see him first thing, and Marcus, apparently, actually smiled at that, assumed it was good news. Some acknowledgement of the Henderson pitch he'd been so obsessed with, maybe even the promotion he'd been not so subtly angling for since spring. He sat down across from a man named Richard Holloway, CEO of the firm, in an office with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the whole downtown skyline. Marcus had spent 5 years telling people he'd basically built through sheer talent and hustle. Richard didn't waste time. My father told me later that Richard doesn't like meetings that drag, and this one, from what I understand, took less than 4 minutes. "I got a call from Robert this weekend," Richard said, "and Marcus." Again, this part I only know secondhand, but I believe every word of it, apparently just blinked, not immediately connecting the name to anything, because it had genuinely never once occurred to him in 5 years to wonder how a man with his particular interview history had ended up in that office. "Robert," Richard repeated when Marcus didn't respond. "Your father-in-law." I think this is the part where it finally landed, according to my dad, who heard the whole story from Richard directly over drinks 2 weeks later, delivered with no small amount of amusement. Marcus's face apparently did something complicated, some dawning, sick recognition, because on some distant level he had to have known. He had to have known that his interview 5 years ago had gone badly. I actually asked my father about this later, needing to hear it confirmed, and he told me almost gently that Marcus had frozen completely during the technical portion, that the hiring committee had been ready to pass, that it was my father, an old friend of Richard's from business school, who made one phone call asking for a favor, one quiet request to create a role that didn't strictly need to exist, specifically so that his daughter's new husband could have a stable, respectable career. Marcus's entire persona, the 6-figure salary, the effortless confidence, the constant reminders that his job was the reason our lifestyle worked, had been built brick by brick, on a foundation my father poured for him as a wedding gift he never even knew he'd receive. "He tells me you left your wife alone at the hospital Thursday night," Richard said, "before emergency surgery, to go to a concert." Marcus reportedly started to explain, started reaching for the same tired script about non-refundable tickets and routine procedures, and Richard apparently just held up one hand, the universal gesture of a man who has already made his decision and is not remotely interested in hearing an appeal. "I've known Robert for 30 years, Richard said. "I created your position as a favor to him. I can uncreate it just as easily." He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. "This is effective immediately. Security will help you collect your things. There's no severance package attached to a termination for cause, and abandoning a spouse mid-medical emergency is, in my professional opinion, more than sufficient cause." Marcus, according to my dad, sat frozen in that chair for a long moment, staring at a termination letter for a job he'd never actually earned, in an office he'd walked into that morning believing himself to be a self-made man standing at the top of a mountain he'd climbed entirely on his own. He called me 40 minutes later. I was home by then, back at the house, technically, though I'd already started making arrangements to change that. I let it ring twice before I answered, mostly out of curiosity. "They fired me," he said, voice already cracking, exactly as raw and desperate as it would sound on the voicemail I'd hear later that same afternoon at my parents' house. "This has to be a mistake, please. You have to talk to your dad. I don't understand what's happening." "I know," I said. "He told me." The silence on the other end had a different quality than my dad's silence in the hospital hallway had. This one was panic, pure and undiluted. A man realizing in real time that the floor he'd been standing on for 5 years had never actually been his own. "I need you to fix this," he said, "please. This is our whole life. This is everything I can." "I'm not going to fix it," I said, and I said it calmly, the same calm I'd found somewhere around 11:47 p.m. in that recovery room, the calm that hadn't left me since. "I'm filing for divorce. My lawyer's drawing up the paperwork this week. The locks are already changed, so don't bother driving over. You can grab your things when my dad's lawyer coordinates a time. You can't just—" "I can," I said. "You left me on an operating table to go to a concert, Marcus. You didn't even wait to hear if I was okay. I think you're going to have plenty of free time now to figure out where you're staying. Maybe the venue has a couch." I hung up before he could say anything else. I set the phone down on the nightstand, screen dark, and I sat there for a moment in the quiet of a bedroom that was already starting to feel like it belonged only to me. I didn't cry. I didn't feel the urge to check on him, to soften the blow, to manage his feelings the way I'd spent 5 years managing them instead of my own. I just felt tired, in the good way, the way you feel after finally setting down something heavy you'd carried for so long you'd forgotten it had a weight at all. I slept 11 hours that night, deeper and more peaceful than I had in years, in a house that finally belonged entirely to me.